All right, so like we just talked about, we are going to be reading together Handout 3B. So you need to open to that in your workbook if you are not already there. Again, it is Handout 3B. So we're going to do exactly what we did last time, and this will be what we do every time we read. So we are doing a close read with annotations. So again, that just means a careful reading with notes. And this is going to be really helpful you today because once again, we are trying to find the main idea. So go ahead and write that at the top of your page as well. We want to find the main idea, which means what is this text mostly about? Okay, so the main idea is the main thing that the author talks about. And you're going to use this to complete an assignment at the end of class that you will find on Schoology. So we're going to start to fill it out together, and then you will finish it on your own. So while you have your workbook open to Handout 3B, you'll also want to pull up the assignment on Schoology. I'll write that up here. It is Handout 3C on Schoology. All right, so we know that whenever we start reading a new text, one of the hints that the author gives us about what the article is mostly about is the title. So this title says, "A New Nation Comes to Indian Country." And as we've already been talking about, we're learning about how Americans who moved west impacted Indian country. So I am thinking this might be about how Americans impacted Indian country. We might be that nation. I'm going to put USA with a question mark. We might be the new people who came to Indian country. So we're going to read on and see. Another hint is the heading. So I'm going to take a look at the headings before we start. So one of them is settlers. Another heading says miners. And the final heading says ranchers. So I'm thinking as a reader, those are all groups of people. They're not really a nation, but maybe these are the new people who came to Indian country. Okay, so we're going to read on and find out if my prediction is correct. Please make sure that you are following along in your workbook and making the same annotations that I am, because this is one of the biggest things that good readers do. Little changed in Indian country in the first years after the Lewis and Clark journey. So after they came to visit, not much changed. So I'm going to write, not much changed at first. The corps of Discovery had failed to find an easy route to the Pacific, and few people wanted to follow their difficult path. So because the path they found was challenging, not many people wanted to take it. Which means not many people went west. But the expedition had put American boots on the ground for the first time. In addition, the information it compiled or collected documented a vast new territory ready for national expansion. And I'm going to look back. If you remember, last time we talked about how there are dictionary words on the back that I can use. So document means to provide evidence for. So they gathered more information, Lewis and Clark did, to bring back to tell people who were still in the East what the West was like. And that made the new territory, or that made the USA, ready for expansion, which means they wanted to grow by going to the West. West of the Missouri River, that expansion began gradually. So it began slowly, just like they said up here, right? Not much changed. Everything happened slowly. A profitable, that means they made money, fur trade encouraged outposts and new settlements. After 1850, so that is a long time, right? That is 50 years later. After 1850, gold rushes in California, Montana, and Oregon built remote settlements into towns. So I'm going to circle gold because that's something that brought people to the West. People wanted gold. Over time, open land attracted settlers. Okay, so I'm going to erase this because I didn't circle that well. So one thing that brought people was gold. Another thing is land. The coming of railroads completed the transformation of the region. So before, they didn't want to use the path Lewis and Clark did, because if you remember, they had to travel by foot and boat. But once railroads were developed, people found it easier to travel. By century's end, Americans had a new name for Indian country. They called it the West. This process was not a peaceful one. Rather, it was punctuated by violence and military conflict. So already I'm seeing one impact we had when Americans went west, right? It was not peaceful. There was violence and conflict. So when Americans went west, that led to conflict. All right. So far, I think we're right. I think the title really does kind of give the main idea, right? Because it's telling us so far all about how when the U.S. went west, it was not good for the Indians. So far, we're going to see if it continues to talk about that. So make sure you have the same notes that I do. And then we're going to continue reading with the first heading, which is new settlers. And I remember up here, they talked about how over time, open land attracted settlers. So I'm going to write, I think they may have wanted land in the West. 3 events near mid-century unleashed a flood of American settlements across Indian country. In 1846, a treaty with Great Britain fixed the northern boundary of the United States at the 49th parallel, securing Americans' title to the Columbian River country. So basically what that means, we got more land, right? So we made a treaty or an agreement. That should be one of our words. So if I look here for treaty, it says a formal agreement between 2 or more countries. So we made an agreement with Great Britain so that we could get more land. 2 years later, the discovery of gold in California began a rush that attracted 250,000 people to what had been a distant province of the young Republic of Mexico. Okay, so not only did we find more land, people also found riches because there was gold. This is all happening in the West. At almost the same time, so this is the third thing that happened because it said 3 events, right? 3 events. So the first was we got more land. Second was there was gold. At the same time, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War and transferred a massive arc of new territory to the United States. Suddenly, the United States became a continental power. Okay, so we got even more land. And that's the third event. So we got land. We have potential money people could go and get by finding gold. So these are the reasons settlers wanted to go to the West. Settlers, merchants, and entrepreneurs heading west from St. Louis. Oh, I remember that's where Lewis and Clark started. They were now eager to set up American institutions in Indian country. They assumed that the land was theirs and that their needs superseded. I'm going to see what that means. Superseded, it says, take over the place of. So they thought their needs were more important than those of the existing Indian communities that were already there. By the centennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1904, more than 6 million new people moved to the territory visited by the Corps of Discovery. So over 6 million people moved to the West. So they moved to the West. And I'm going to pause in the chat. Tell me one reason why people moved to the West. We just covered 3 reasons why settlers moved west. Why did they move west? What were they wanting to find? All right, miners. From the days of Columbus, European expansion was driven by stories of gold and silver waiting to be gathered up by energetic explorers. In the 19th century, Americans often rushed to native lands to claim their share of these riches. So again, people wanted that money. Such episodes usually terrified local Indian communities because they attracted groups of young men who were traveling without their families and who were often violent. So I know that's one way miners were mean to Indians. Right? It says they came to their land. Miners came to the Indians' land because they wanted gold, and they often were violent. The miners were violent towards the Indians. Among the most traumatic gold rushes in the 19th century was one triggered by the discovery of gold on lands that the Nez Perce reserved for themselves and their 1855 agreement with Governor Stevens. The invasion of their reservation, that means when someone enters without their permission, set off disputes or fights with young miners who were often unaware that they were trespassing on their land. Furthermore, there were arguments within the tribe over how to respond to the crisis. So not only was there fights, right? There were also arguments. So there's fighting, arguing, violence. So these miners had a really negative impact on the Indian communities. We read in our other article that Indian communities were really good places where people were peaceful with each other. They gave gifts. So when Americans came west and we started to just invade their land that they had set up to get gold, we had a really negative impact. We're going to read about one more group. Ranchers. After the American Civil War, while homesteaders built farms in the West, and while miners filed claims in remote mountains, cattle and sheep ranchers moved into the arid northern plains and plateau country of Oregon to raise food for growing cities. Okay, so that tells me ranchers wanted to raise food, which obviously you need land for, right? So they went west to get more land because the cities were all growing, and so they had more people to feed. While Native people were unhappy about the displacement of buffalo, and if I look down here, displacement says forcing out of a home or place. So because we brought animals like our cows or pigs, the buffalo, which were the Native Americans' animals, they were displaced. So the buffalo were moved off of the land that they had first. So not only were the Native Americans displaced, but even their livelihood, the buffalo that they hunted, were also misplaced. Many tribal communities found ranching offered an attractive way to make a living. It preserved traditional gender roles and allowed for a seasonal round of herding activities. Ranching attracted thousands of outsiders to Indian country. These newcomers quickly exhausted the lands available and pressed Western tribes to open new areas for non-Indian ranching. So they really took over all the land that the Indians were trying to use for what they needed. White ranchers urged federal authorities to allow them to graze their herds on what they saw as unused Indian lands. They also wanted to build ambitious dam and irrigation projects. Indian communities along the Lewis and Clark route were often hardest hit by these changes. Many groups lost control over their land. That's an important detail. And they lost water resources, or they even had to watch helplessly while federally built dams inundated, which means covered or flooded. So they flooded and destroyed their homes. Wow, so they definitely had a negative impact. Seems like they not only hurt their land, but that they also hurt their homes and the people. So now that we've read through this, we need to think of what is the main idea. So what did this mostly tell us about the people who went to Indian country? What were they like? How did they treat them? What is this mostly about?